Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show to take place right here in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Jake Friedman.
I'm Brendan Hansen.
And I'm Pete Wissinger.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
And today we have what is maybe adjacent to a what we talk about sort of topic. And this is what we talk about when we call a game mean. I think this is a common part of gamers' vernacular when they talk about games. Many games are described as mean, or people might say, I don't play, that game's too mean for me, or I love mean games. But I've really been curious about what exactly we're talking about when we use that phrase. And is it the appropriate phrase that we should even use, or should we be the change we want to see?
Right, so this is less an episode on mean games and more an episode on what we talk about when we talk about mean games.
So that means we get to start by talking about what is mean? Is that right? What does it mean to be mean in the context of a game?
Okay, so let me throw this question out to you, Jake and Brendan. When someone tells you about that they played a game you'd never heard of, and one thing they say is it's a really mean game, what does that bring up for you?
The first thing that comes to mind, just right off the dome, is negative player interaction, or like take that is the sort of mechanism you hear thrown around where I can do something in this game that's directly harming one or more players in their pursuit of winning the game.
As I was thinking about this topic, for me, that came to mind, right? High player agency games where the point of the game is players directly interacting with one another to disrupt one another's plans. And I mentioned that because I think we're going to come back to that, disrupting one another's plans. But also, so I think there's player-to-player meanness and a game facilitating that through agency, but then game-to-player meanness of a game just being mean to the players. And in my mind, both of those can lead to mean games. In the Year of the Dragon has very little player interaction. It's all indirect. It's a Stefan Feld game where you're sort of drafting these actions, trying to build up your kingdom, and then the game is just mean to you. It takes things away constantly. It gives you problems, and in some cases, it tells you they're coming, almost in all cases, but you often don't have the ability to actually deal with them in a way that you can, so it feels mean to me. So I think there's games themselves can be mean, and games can facilitate players being mean to one another.
And in my mind, when people talk about mean games, they're more talking about games in which the interaction feels mean rather than games that are maybe brutal or harsh. I might be off on that, but that, at least to me, is more where my mind goes with that vernacular.
So this episode, we're going to stick to player meanness. Players
I think
using
that's
the
wise
within the game as being mean to each other, and leave the game being mean to the players, the brutal game, the harsh game, for a different conversation. Is that right?
I think so. We're not here to talk about whether the epidemic cards in Pandemic are mean or not. That's not what we're talking about. So, yeah, I think to what Jake had said, this idea of negative interaction is maybe where people think of meanness. But I actually think it's more complicated than that. I think certain games that have a lot of negative interaction are described as mean more than others. And I'd like to kind of get into maybe where we think there is this like line, and how either the game makes people cross that line, or whether that's just maybe group dependent, or is it a game thing? Jake, what do you think?
Well, actually, I want to defer to Brendan. He's got his hand raised here.
Well, okay. Before we even get to that question, Pete, I want to pose a question back to you, and then let's go to that question. Is negative interaction a value judgment already? Right? Is the type of interaction that we're talking about inherently mean? Like, negative interaction is a colloquial term that people throw around in games, and I think that that's a low from if you take a step back from the game and the players. I know what you mean because I play board games, participate in the culture, but is that already a frame that is putting some value judgment on that type of interaction to basically impart the idea that games can be mean and that by partaking in that type of interaction, they are mean because there's negativity to that. You could say direct. We could have said close. There's you could take all sorts of. I think direct player interaction is another way you could frame that, right? I guess there's positive direct interaction.
Yeah, no, but you're absolutely right, and it's for sure that word negative interaction is also a loaded word. If I go to the worker space that you wanted to go to, whether I knew you wanted to go there or not, or did it intentionally, is that negative interaction or is that just interaction?
I mean, just even calling it a worker space is evoking all kinds of negative things for me right now. Why not a weekend space, a summer holiday space?
Oh no.
Okay. Like I'm gonna like take. I feel like maybe my role in this conversation is to like be the listener in part and just say like, what the hell are we? I feel like we're too off track already. I think. Can I pose a question? I just want to like know this. This episode is called "Can Games Be Mean?" Do you guys think the answer to that question is yes or no? And like your top level rationale. Can we start there? And then I think we can nitpick from there.
All right. So I've been thinking about this a lot since I posed this question on our Discord like maybe like almost a month ago. And kind of where I've come around is that, and this is maybe a cop out, but that meanness is sort of in the eyes of the beholder to a certain extent. That there are things that some people would think is mean and other players would not think is mean. But I do think that some games can incentivize more behaviors that turn off gamers who don't like, quote, mean games.
And I think strategy games often encourage us to make non-emotional decisions, right? Rational decisions around the sort of chasing a point total, typically. And that when we experience those games emotionally as humans, because we're humans playing those games, when other players act rationally, it can feel mean if they disrupt our plans. I also think games themselves can be mean, but that's outside the scope of this conversation. So I think, yes, absolutely, playing games, you can be mean playing a game to one another, but only because it feels mean. Jake, you disagree.
I think you guys are all copping out all over the place here.
Take a stand, Jake. Take a stand.
Yeah, what?
I think for me, it's obvious that games can be mean.
Yeah, that's what we both said.
Yeah. So, but you guys said it in way like more. I don't know.
Why use lot word when few words make sense, right?
Too much nuance.
Well, here's another thing. We're also getting into something this podcast talks about a lot, which is the magic circle. And the whole idea of the magic circle is that these normal rules of life don't necessarily apply to the playing of this game in certain ways. And so I can behave in maybe certain aggressive ways while playing a game that would not be socially acceptable behaviors outside of the game. And I think that for some people, their magic circle has trouble separating that out.
Like, I would never drink your milkshake at lunch. But if we were playing a strategy game that lets me drink your milkshake, I'm going to drink your milkshake. That's kind of the gist here.
And then you guys are saying that a game that encourages one player to drink another player's milkshake is therefore a mean game.
So I think I'm gonna try and get by the end of this to make you think, Jake, that games are not mean. I think that's my goal is to
People are mean.
turn you around. And I do think that
But
yes,
you said games can be mean.
well, but I wouldn't. I think that
That's what I'm trying to
yeah. I think that certain players find things in games mean.
right. That's
Um,
undeniable. That is
correct.
definitely true. Players have
That's the
expressed that
hardest
to me
take.
before.
So in my mind, um, we can all agree that certain player behaviors
Hmm.
can be mean. And
Yes.
that's maybe not necessarily the game's fault, although some games do give you the agency to play it in a mean way that the game doesn't necessarily incentivize. For example, if I'm playing a game where I get to attack somebody and I go out of my way to attack the weakest player in a way that maybe does not actually help me. So I think anytime you're sort of punching down or you are taking negative actions in a way that does not actually help you win the game, but just because you can or you want to, that definitely, do we call that a game problem or is that a player problem if a player engages in that?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think those can be the games that often the experience of playing them can create the sense of like wrongdoing being done to you more than others. And those are games that have kind of this uh, cloudy decision space around what's the optimal play. In some sense, if we're us three are playing a game, and maybe it's a 5-player game, and Pete is in first place, and I could attack him, or I could attack Brendan, who's in last place. But by attacking Brendan, that is going to like totally knock him out, right? Eliminate his chance of winning the game. So that's good for me. And perhaps that might even give me a little bit of a better territorial footing. Um, you know, all things being equal, players could come to rational decisions either way. Like, what should you do in that situation? However, if I choose to attack Brendan, knock him out of the game, say we're playing a Twilight Imperium or Game of Thrones, the board game, a game that's going to go on for many more hours and kind of just knock you out of it right now, that is like one of the most brutal feeling moments, I think, in games. That feels like mean to do that to you.
So what I'm hearing, so I think we're pulling on a lot of threads here. One, we're talking about this misuse of power, right? One player has more agency than other players at the table. And I'm hearing a situation in which we've described players are going to make rational decisions to pursue victory. So Pete, you created a situation in which the player who's winning, rather than, if you have the agency, I think mean games are often high agency games, rather than maybe targeting the player in second, because maybe there's some risk involved. You want to let second and third fight with each other. Maybe they'll weaken each other, and you just spend your turn targeting the player who's in fourth. For me, it's games that are high agency like that aren't necessarily mean, but they facilitate meanness. So it's not that the game itself is mean, but it gives the players the agency to do it. If it's a rational decision, for me, and if the player themselves who's doing it thinks it's rational in their heart, it's not mean, right? They're playing strategically to win the game. If over lunch someone was mean and drank someone else's milkshake, and then that player brings that that disdain for the person who drank their milkshake into the game and targets them irrationally, that's mean. And it's because of the breaking of that magic circle. But if players are acting rationally within the game, I don't think it's actually mean to do everything you can within your agency as a player to win. But we're emotional beings trying to be as rational as possible, often when we play games. So it can make things feel really mean because we don't always see games the same, right? Something like Zuvadis is a game built around the fact that different players have different information. So when I think someone's in first, and I think, if I think I'm in first, and I think Pete's in fourth, and I think Jake is in third, and Paul's in third, not everyone might agree on that. So what I do might be perceived as mean if I pick on you, Pete, but maybe I think you're in second and you think you're in fourth. So all of a sudden you think I'm the bully. I think I'm being rational, right? And that's a difference of perspectives that I think can bring out meanness when even I think I'm acting rationally.
I can I go? Because I think I think this is a really important nuance in this conversation to pick apart. This idea that the game can facilitate situations where the players all acting rationally feel like people are being mean. But if they're acting rationally, then they're not actually being mean. I would say that is true, but that is for me, that means it's a mean game. A game that is creating situations, it is aligning incentives in such a way that players act in punishing and mean ways to one another through purely seeking what is best for themselves in pursuit and victory in the game. To me, that is what a mean game is.
And so this is where I question if mean is the proper term, because I don't think that any person would say that in life they like being mean. I don't think that, or at least not a moral person would say
Well
that.
adjusted.
A well-adjusted person with a soul. I have to say one quick aside. I was looking at a person's Board Game Geek profile for various reasons. I don't know this person, but I found them because of some comments. Anyway, they have their like thing under their name on Board Game Geek. They have a whole thing about games they don't like, and it's like, I don't like this kind of game, this kind, blah blah blah. And then at the end, it's like, what do I like? And then there's lots of things they do like. And one thing they say is, I like auctions because auctions are just structured bullying. As a result, I don't like blind bidding because there's no bullying, just guessing. So
Takes all
this
kinds.
person has a different view of auctions than I do. But aside from people like that, I think that the games that you are describing, Jake, are games that I and many people I play games with love. However, we don't enjoy meanness. And so this is where I question whether these games are actually mean or not. And that maybe that's not the appropriate term, because I think that there are ways where playing like that, if everyone at the table is bought in and enjoying it, can create a lot of fun. And I think that if I play aggressively to take someone out so that I can win, that's not mean if it's done for the sake of me winning a game, playing by the rules of the game, and following the incentives of the game. For example, if you and I play Magic the Gathering and I kill you, I think we would agree that killing someone in a game is mean. I think that me knocking you out of the game, that's player elimination, that's mean. When I counterspell all of your spells and kill your creatures, that's mean. You paid a lot of mana to put those creatures out. But I don't think that you, Jake, would call Magic the Gathering, the way I just described it, mean.
No, you're right. I would not. And I think that to me indicates that there's more to it than simply maybe the rules as written. But Pete, can I pose a different scenario back to you? You've got your same group of friends that love these types of games that many people would call mean. But instead of a breezy game like Arcs, you're playing the Game of Thrones, the board Game of Thrones, as I've heard you called it before. And the same situation comes up where you have the opportunity to eliminate me in for all intents and purposes, right? Knock me essentially off the board, put me way behind other players to such a significant extent that everybody would agree that I'm out of the game. I have no chance of winning or even finishing top 3, right? And that's going to happen at the 20th minute in what we all expect to be a 4-hour game.
Yeah.
Still not mean.
Or that's a
maybe
great
you
question.
would choose not to do that because of how devastating that would be to my experience this afternoon that we've planned for months to have.
So I have another interesting story to share that's on a similar topic to this. So I was talking about this topic with Jake, our friend Miles. And Miles has daughters that he plays games with who are actually like pretty hardcore gamers for being young children. And he's talked about playing a children's game. I don't remember the name of it with his daughters. And it's a game where essentially every round you slide a tile in, which creates paths for your character to move forward, right? And on your turn, you have to slide a tile in, and it's kind of a race. And Miles was like way behind his daughters, and his older daughter, who is very good at games, but is still like a kid, kept intentionally sliding the tiles in ways that didn't help her, but just stopped Miles from doing anything. And like the first time she did it, he was kind of like, oh, I see what you did. That's clever. But she did it like every turn. And so he's like way behind. They're on their way out. And he like told her, like, hey, just so you know, like, I'm going to stop playing now. And it's because I'm not having fun. Like, this isn't fun for me. I don't get to do anything. You don't have, and if you want to play like that, that's fine. But just know that when you play like you're playing with some people, they're not going to have fun. And he sort of used it as kind of like a teaching moment to show that just because a game does let you do something doesn't necessarily mean that you should.
So I think that's a really interesting example, Pete, because to me, that is an example of Miles's daughter having a different she was trying to create a different magic circle than Miles while playing that. Her goal was no longer to win the game, but to obstruct Miles from winning the game, right? Every decision she could make to obstruct Miles' path to victory, she would do. So she's not trying to win for herself anymore, but to just ensure her dad doesn't win, which is the way I probably played a game that way when I was a kid, learning how to sort of protect magic circles. But I think that's a very different example than all the players coming to Game of Thrones, what is likely going to be a 4-hour game. And to Jake's point, a game that says you can say anything you want, you're going to simultaneously reveal orders, and by its design encourages you to lie to each other, to deceive one another, because it's very difficult to get ahead in a Game of Thrones if you are honest with everyone at the table about what you're going to do, and if everyone always believes you, because then they can plan around that, right? So the game itself is incentivizing it. So for Jake's example, I understand where Game of Thrones feels like a mean game because all of the incentives are designed to encourage you to lie to your friends and backstab them, to set up plans with one another, fake plans, and then subvert those plans for your own personal gain. To me, that feels really different than Miles's daughter doing something mean that's breaking of the magic circle that we should all play to win. I think the Miles's daughter doing that is sort of a failure of the social contract, whereas the Game of Thrones example is a fulfillment of the social contract in a game that it has high player agency and facilitates what would in a normal real life similar experience be incredibly mean. But in that situation, I guess it's mean, but it's socially really different.
I think this is bringing to mind that different people will have like different tolerances for what they would find mean in the magic circle writ large, but also for themselves in the game. I think that question I asked Pete, which he dodged expertly, is, like, I think I could see it on your face. That's like, even you guys in that group, right, is like, oh, I don't know if that feels right to kind of do that, right? And I think that in many of these cases, even like groups that have expressly agreed, like, we are out for blood, we all find that fun, nobody's going to take it personally, like, there might still be things that kind of cause your heart to twinge when you're playing it, like, oh, I don't know how this kind of fits in with our magic circle, or how we play games, or what I think is fun to do in this game. And there's a million ways you could like justify doing a different action in that moment or whatever.
Yeah. And so I think that what you're kind of showing me, Jake, is that I enjoy playing, quote, mean games with my friends. And so I don't know that I would necessarily enjoy going to a meetup with random people I don't know and playing these same games. I think that maybe the two social occurrences where I would want to play something like the board Game of Thrones is either at a table with my friends or facelessly online with people that I will never know. And I think that I said that these games are only fun if everyone is having fun. And so it's almost like a trust fall of a game where we all have to trust each other in order to let go and have the kind of experience the game can deliver. But like you said, if I really go hard at you round one and just push you to the ground, that probably is an aggressive move. And I think that for many people, they would absolutely find that mean for sure. And something that someone on the Discord said was that games feel mean when you hinder another player's agency and ability to play the game. That is something that feels mean in a game where it's not just that I'm affecting your decision space, but I'm literally eliminating your decision space. And that is in a game that is fragile like that, something that absolutely can feel mean, maybe even to most players.
I love that point, and I just want to quickly bring up Barrage, a Euro game about blocking people's dams. It's supposed to be this super mean game. That's kind of the reputation it has. But when we played it and reviewed it on this podcast, we were sort of surprised to find that it didn't feel mean because in that game, you will get destroyed by experienced players in terms of points at the end of the game, but you won't ever lose your agency. You'll always get the same amount of workers every round, and you'll still get the same kind of decision space regardless of how you're performing points wise in the game, which to me made it feel surprisingly not mean at all.
I do think that Barrage is a good example because I think some players coming to Barrage wouldn't have agreed with our take, Jake, that Barrage actually in practice doesn't feel that mean because you always have something to do. If someone blocks you here, building a dam above you, or building a power plant on your whatever, you can go do something else and probably scoop up points. But I think for some players, meanness is experienced as I have a solid plan that I worked hard to get. I don't have, in reality, I haven't executed my plan. I don't have anything on the board, but I'm playing a game. So something I have is a path forward through the decision space. So to have that then blocked can feel mean because it feels like you're losing that plan, even though it was just a plan and it was something concrete. And I think that can feel mean to some players, but for us who have all agreed into this decision space, often when we're playing strategy games, that you'll do whatever the game will allow to advance your own position, and that if that means negatively blocking someone else, so long as it's not malicious or targeted, right? That going back to Miles' daughter as the example, I think if
Or
we played
because
Barrage,
somebody attacked you, or somebody was rude to you earlier in the day, and now
right,
you're
where
getting
it
it
feels
now.
unfair,
Right.
then I think it feels more mean. So it brings me to us to something like the Zuvadis example, which is just screaming in my head. So longtime listeners of the show will know that Jake and I participated in a Zuvadis game at a convention with a combination of, so everyone knew at least someone at the table, but not everyone didn't know everyone. We didn't come in all knowing each other. And the Zuvadis game ended with the final decision. Zuvadis is a Renner Knizia game. It's a negotiation game. We're trying to advance your sort of creatures up the board. And to do that, you have to get everyone else, at least some other players, to agree you should be able to advance them. It's all a social, conversational negotiation game. And it ended by one player giving up all of their points to another player. And I think up until that point, the game didn't feel that mean to most of us. And at that exact moment where one player decided, I will make this other player win, I think is the moment that some players, including Jake, just were lost. They lost to the game of sort of saying,
Yeah.
this is too
Not for
mean. The
me.
game is being mean to me, not for me. Because my perspective, Jake, is that it no longer felt fair, right?
I would also say that that type of behavior maybe even goes against the spirit and incentives of the game. Um, and so that's, I think, where it's maybe more of a player problem than a game problem. However, as we've discussed, when a game gives people the ability to behave in that way, is that the game's fault? You know, this is what we call a fragile game. And I think that for some people, we talk about a game, you said, Brendan, a game where you spend time building up and have a plan, and then it feels bad when someone blocks your plan. There's a sort of category of gamers that are called like Care Bear gamers. Some people are sort of like that, which is that they will essentially check with the other players to make sure that their play is not negatively impacting what they were planning on doing. Famously, Rado from Rado Runs Through apparently plays games like this with his wife. He talks about it on his channel that they will like they'll play 2-player Agricola and try not to block each other so that they can both do what they want to do. And so for players like that, anything is going to feel mean that in any way is going to make someone pivot against a plan that they were doing. And this is where I actually think that low interaction games can feel meaner when they have any take that element than high interaction games. So
Because
famously, well, okay, so take something like Terraforming Mars
That's what
has
I was
like
thinking too.
negative attack cards, or Dominion has cards that you can put in your deck that the only thing those cards do is like make everyone else discard a card. And I am sure there are Dominion players who never put those cards in their kingdom market. And to a certain extent, that they are weird cards in the game because once someone starts grabbing them, everyone has to start grabbing them. Otherwise, that player is just going to have an advantage. And so I think in sort of maybe less interactive engine building games, when a designer thinks, well, I'm going to throw a couple of nasty cards in just to make some interaction, that actually feels meaner than like if I'm playing Root and blow up all the buildings in someone's clearing.
I think this is a place where language really matters too, because it to me, I think point well taken. It does feel different when you're talking about a low interaction game with take that cards than in a highly interactive game of Zuvadis. But I think what people react to often in the example of the former, the low interactive game, is it's just off putting. It doesn't feel like it jives with the design, and you grabbed it like I don't like the take that of this, or like it feels too mean based on the other design. When in reality, maybe it's more closer to like the feeling of like pettiness. We're all doing our thing, building up, and then somebody does this like kind of small attack against me. I don't like that. It doesn't feel like it fits here. Um, so yeah, I think it sticks out like a sore thumb, which is maybe what people are reacting to. Though I would push back that actually makes it like a meaner game than games that I find enable kind of the real kind of punitive punishing play. Like if I maybe I would propose like a way we might think about like how mean a game is like how badly somebody could harm you in the game if that was like their goal. If they were like, I'm going to seek out screwing over Pete every chance I get in this game, um, with like how much can I do that? How much can I negatively impact Pete's play experience and position in the game? And we don't tend to play games like that, but we should say we are a niche in this podcast, right? I think by and large, Pete, I think you and Paul bring a different perspective to this, but Brendan and I think a lot of kind of our legacy listeners and Discord members are kind of really tend to be spikier players, like players who are playing to like maximize their performance points, try to find like good heuristics for strong strategies on an independent game basis. But not all groups are like that. There are a lot of groups that really kind of savor the metagame aspect of games where if somebody hurts them in one game, they will come after them in the next game to maintain the table presence of like, you don't attack me because anybody who attacks me knows that I'm going to get them back twice fold. And I think like the games that enable me to get Pete back twice fold, to me, like those are the mean games.
that's really interesting. And I think I agree, Jake, but I have an idea. So I think what we're working on right now is a thesis that there, as interaction goes up, meanness goes up proportionally. And I don't think that all of us agree with that sentiment, but I think that's the conversation we've been having. So I want to present a toy game to complicate the conversation we're having. So this toy game is a prototype that I designed that totally failed, but I'm going to use it now as an example because I've stuck with the idea. So this game is called Axes or Allies, not Axis and Allies, Axes or Allies. You have some ability to interact with players directly next to you, and you can, on your turn, it's a simultaneous choice game, choose to take from those around you or help those around you. So you have the ability to have positive player interaction or negative player interaction. And if you can cooperate purely with whoever's next to you, you will always be better. But if you choose to negatively interact while other people are positively interacting, then you'll actually be better off, right? So this is pretty simple, like prisoner's dilemma type game setup. So this is a game where you have high agency, right? You could all participate, help each other, or one person could be mean. Is that a mean game? Because
This
you have the chance to profit off of being mean. But if in a Care Bear group, you would just all help each other over and over and over and over and over, right?
this was going to be, I was expecting one of y'all to come into this podcast and be like, definitively games can't be mean.
Okay.
And I was going to bring up like prisoner dilemma style games as like the kind of smoking gun that games of course can be mean, because we can have like these prisoner dilemmas set up on game shows. Or I don't know, Pete, in the classroom, have you ever done the thing where you offer have the class split in half and you offer them bonus points on the next quiz or test? Everybody gets 2 bonus points if everybody chooses to cooperate. But if one group chooses to steal and the other chooses to cooperate, then the steal group gets 10 bonus points and the other group gets nothing.
Yeah, and then I say these kids are the prison guards, and then the rest of you are all prisoners.
That's mean.
Yeah, I typically so. But here's the thing, Jake. Okay, so I have a question for you, Jake. Would you say that you don't like mean games?
No, I wouldn't go that far.
Okay, because I was going to say what Brenda's describing as a prisoner's dilemma game, you being proof that games are mean. We could talk about the Resistance, right? Which the Resistance, would we call the Resistance a mean game?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Why?
I think it's mean because like it can create bad feelings, right? Like lying to your friend. I mean, it's got a lot of hallmarks of like, reality TV shows where people can feel really betrayed when they trust someone. I tell them, absolutely, you can trust me. I will never betray you. And then I betray you. Like, that is, in my mind, a mean thing. And we play these games, people love it, we have fun, we play it again. The stakes are low because it's short, so it's not the meanest game out there. But I think like that core mechanism in the game is inherently a bit nasty.
Okay, so I think what we're kind of tiptoeing around here is the emotional ranges of playing games. So we're talking about what kinds of emotions you feel based on the experience of playing a game. And you just said it's mean because it brings up negative emotions.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a little simplistic. So of course, here I go. I'm going to bring up Cole Worley. So Cole Worley once said in an interview that they don't want to make games that are fun. They want to make games that are good. And I remember bringing this up on Discord and it creating a lot of discussion. But that's a clickbaity way of saying what he was trying to say is people want games that just give them. Some people want to make and design games that just make you feel good. And he said that any type of art is actually capable of creating so many emotions and that people enjoy different types of emotions. Like some people might like reading books that make them cry. And some people might say, why would I want to read something that makes me cry? And so I think that having a wide range of emotions while playing a game is not necessarily mean or even negative. Some people like games that make them feel frustrated or like games that make them feel scared or intense. And I don't want to equate that with meanness because I don't think that that's actually accurate.
So that goes back to this idea, though, that any mismatch of expectations about why we're playing a particular game presents opportunity for this sort of fragility that can make a game feel mean. Because I agree, right? I've played in games of the Resistance where someone just from pure bottom of their heart, soul, entire being says, Pete, I promise you, I am not the Resistance, right? And they put on the performance of a lifetime, right? We're talking Globe Theater, remembered for a generation. And then they're of course lying. That's an amazing thing that I still think about and talk about. But I will say, the player on the receiving end of that lie was in real pain after that game. In part, I think because
People don't look
we
very
were
sympathetic
so
at all.
engaged and they so deeply believed. I it's so hard because I think, Jake, you almost with the like talking about Game of Thrones, right? Where the game is incentivizing you, encouraging you to do things that outside of a game playing space are considered mean. If I lie to you guys, in real life, that's mean. That is an unkind thing to do. So if the game is creating an environment that's encouraging you to do that, that feels kind of mean, I think. But at the same time, it's a game, so we're coming at it. So I think this is where it all comes down to who's experiencing it. So Jake, I both see the perspective of Game of Thrones as a mean game because it's encouraging you to do things that we would colloquially talk about as mean. And Pete, I also see what you were saying of no, these games aren't inherently mean. Almost games can't be mean because as long as people are acting rationally and have a shared understanding of how we should play, what the objective is, that it's not mean to fulfill the spirit of the game as presented. And I think both of those things can be true depending on what you bring to the game. What you're looking for to get out of it. I
Right.
think
But okay, sorry, go ahead and finish.
I just want to I think the Resistance is a really good example, and I had it jumping around in my head for a long time because I think you can both play that game you could play that game in a really mean way, but you can also play it in a not mean way. And I think that the mean way is sort of if you it's targeted harassment, right? Before we even start playing at all, I just decide no matter which card I draw, I'm going to blame Jake. And no matter what happens, my whole goal is to just harass Jake and try to get the narrative as focused on Jake as possible. If I'm a spy, I'm accusing Jake of being a spy the entire game. If I'm the resistance, I'm accusing Jake of being a spy the entire game, regardless of if I think he's a spy or not. I think that's kind of mean. But now we're back to the Miles example, right? Where I'm no longer trying to win. I'm just trying to be an asshole and show that given the agency of this game, I could
But
be a jerk.
it could be target harassment because like you know that like I am not good at defending myself and
Sure.
you are the spy, right? And
Yeah.
like you know that by targeting me is actually a smart strategy because you've seen it play out before successfully.
So
Um
is that mean? That's what you're saying.
I
Like
I
if
mean I
I
think
identify that strategy.
yeah, I think it can be. And I also just want
Mm.
to say really quickly to Pete's point about games are art and like beautiful things and we can have a whole range of emotion. I'm not saying that mean games are bad at all. I'm just saying that like games can be mean. That's like one of many emotions. I don't want actually well I wouldn't say I don't like mean games. I would say that I or at least I think I don't like games that don't have any negative outcomes possible. Right? I want there to be some type of drama. And whether that's like I'm hoping to draw this card. If I draw it, it's gonna be great. Or like I don't want to draw this because I'm gonna bust, and then I bust. Like that's a negative emotion, but that makes the game fun. Um, that's not inherently mean. So like I just want to like say that like when I say mean, I'm not saying all negative emotions are mean or that like meanness equals bad. So I don't think that's like equivalency.
And I would say that while I would say that highly interactive games are not games we should necessarily call mean, I would say that I don't want to play games with mean players. And so I think that, if I was playing for example, I don't know, Forest Shuffle with a mean player. That's not necessarily going to impact my play of Forest Shuffle all that much. But if I was playing like, I'm trying to think of like the meanest game. Like if I was playing Munchkin with a mean person, I don't want to play Munchkin anyway, but that would just make it so much worse because that player is given the tools to talk about expression, to express a very negative style of play that it maybe, I think it's closer to meanness.
So, yeah, no, totally. And I think I want to talk about the resistance just a tiny, tiny bit more. Because I think this example that we got to of Jake, you mentioning
the spy.
Okay, so if someone identifies that a player is bad at deflecting verbal attacks, not good at controlling a narrative in a quickly moving social conversation, and every time you play the resistance or every that you target that player, that could both be optimal, but I think also stop feeling fair at some point, right? We all come to games that we play with different skills. In the resistance, the skills that we have are social, and I think that your social ability acumen at those specific skills that the resistance is testing can be more obvious than when we're all going to play Castles of Burgundy and I'm bad at a specific type of value judgment around these two different potential outcomes of will the dice roll in this specific way and give me that doesn't feel as personal to who I am as my communication skills. So I think for me, I'm convinced that by this sort of shared definition of meanness in games, the resistance is mean because if we all came and said we're just going to try to play the best version of the resistance possible, the same group, and there's always that one player who was just a little bit worse, then we should all just pick on them all the time. And that would be mean. But I think when we're all playing games with each other, I don't think this group, if the four of us plus one of our other friends sat down, play the resistance 5 players, and one of us was slightly worse, I don't think we would actually play that way. Even though we all typically play to win, because I think we all play to win asterisks and have a good time. And that's why magic circles are so fragile. Because if you veer in one direction, one player veers too far in one direction, I'm just playing to win, all of a sudden you have this mean behavior that does feel mean and is hampering one player's ability to enjoy the game. Or if you veer too far in the other direction, I'm not going to make decisions that advance my position as often as I can. All of a sudden it feels like you don't care and the game feels frivolous. And that's that fragility that just a hair in the wrong direction can make it feel mean. I don't know. I do think games can incentivize meanness is where I've ended up.
I mean, that example with the resistance is something that would come up in almost any high interaction game of just like the metagame of like, I know that Jared is our friend Jared, friend of the podcast, is like really good at Tigris and Euphrates. He's like number 1 in the world at Tigris and Euphrates.
Literally.
So like, would we not be wise and fair players to like say, all being equal, I'm going to try and go after Jared, and we all make that decision kind of like independently? That probably maybe doesn't feel so fun for Jared after a few games of people kind of teaming up against him.
So let me throw out another game here that we all have experience with. And I do want to say I think it's interesting that many mass market games that families play together have a lot more take that than hobby games. I think that if you think about what kinds of games are people playing, they're playing games like Uno or Sorry or whatever. And these are games where the game is giving you the tools to make a feel bad moment for someone so that everybody can laugh. And so I think that there is something core to us learning to play games that is, especially like tabletop games, that is going to create experiences like that. But I think a game that many people think can be mean is Catan. Okay. So there are a couple of ways that you could be, quote, mean in Catan. But the biggest one that people bring up is, of course, you all know what I'm going to say. What am I going to say?
You're going to say that I'm going to trade you, Pete. I will trade you all of my wheat. But then
That's
I'm
not
going
what
to
I'm
play
talking
I have a different example. I have a different
and take it all back right after.
Well,
I
yeah,
make
the
the
Monopoly,
trade.
that's just
bad.
good play. But anyway, Jake, what do you think I'm going to talk about?
Like like cutting somebody off right at the beginning of the game.
Well, there's
I will
there's a
never
way the
trade with
game
Pete.
forces you to be mean.
Oh, the robber.
The robber, okay? The most statistically
But my way
common,
is the way mean.
the most statistically common role that will come up in a 2-die roll is the number 7. And in Catan, when a 7 is rolled, what you do is you take this pawn that is called the robber and you put it on a hex and you block that text from producing and you literally steal from somebody. Okay. So some people would say that, first of all, some people would just say that that mechanism is mean. But I think what we might all agree with is that that mechanism can facilitate meanness based on how you use it. Because most games of Catan I've played, the way that you use the robber is you put it on whoever is winning their best tile or whoever has the most resources, or like maybe I need to steal from Jake because I know Jake has brick and I don't, right? I think that what we would call rational uses. But if I'm just going to like put it on someone because I think it's funny because they're losing, that would be mean. But I play Catan with my students because in my economics class, I use Catan as a way to sort of apply economic thinking. And so Jake's example of, Jared's the best in the world at Tigris, so the meta is just attack Jared. That's the meta when I join a game of Catan with my students, because I play up all this bravado that like I always win and blah, blah, blah. And it kind of breaks the game if you're playing a 4-player game of Catan and 3 people have decided that you don't trade with this person and the robber always goes in their space. Now, I still can have a good time playing with my students like that just because it's a different way of interacting with my students, right? It's a way to like connect with my students, but it is not fun in the same way a game of Catan can be fun to play it and what I think a type of behavior that we've talked about many times, that games that allow for bullying are
Yeah.
games that can feel the meanest.
I think that's kind of very similar to what I was saying too, which is like, or the meta games, like the games that the more a game allows you to bully somebody, if you wanted to, kind of like the meaner that game is on a kind of meanness spectrum. But I would add in, perhaps as we're having this conversation, I'm learning, I'm informing my thinking, listening to you guys because you're both very smart, so you'll probably agree with what I have to say next. Which is that like those games have the highest capacity for meanness, right? The more I can bully somebody, the more capacity for meanness is in that game. But the actual meanness of the game would be like games that have high capacity, but also games that like highly incentivize that play. Like the more that the bullying play is the optimal play,
Yeah.
like that is kind of like the sweet spot of these are the meanest games out there.
Game of Thrones.
Great.
Oh my gosh, stop. Anyway, so would you all say that bash the leader games or games that incentivize ganging up on the person who is winning, would you call that mean?
Yeah, so a classic example of this being something like Munchkin, where you have to get to level 10 or whatever. But all the players can potentially chip in and stop them. I think no, because as Jake just said, you're incentivized to do it in a way that it's clear to everyone that the balance of that game depends on you doing that.
It's
So
not bullying if they're in first place.
if
It's
they're in first
bullying
place,
if
yeah.
they're in last place and you're like doing it to them instead of the person in first place.
If in Azul, I know Jake needs a blue, and I have no need for blue, and I just always take the blue, and I'm hurting myself to hurt Jake, advancing neither of us, that's just bullying and to spite myself and Jake, right? That's another example of a game. I guess that's just me being irrationally mean in a game that's not that mean, because I should
So
only do that if I could hurt Jake and help myself.
Brendan's just over here just coming up with more ways to be mean to me in games. It's like, here's another way I could be mean to Jake in a game.
Have you all ever played? I just have this huge list of games that people have brought up. And I do want to talk about, I don't know how much longer we want to talk, but I do want to talk about the game I would say is, if games are mean, this is one of the meanest games that I love. And this is a game called The Estates. Have either of you played The Estates before?
I played it one time.
Did you find it to be a mean game, Jake?
I'm sure it is, but it's just not that clear in my mind exactly what's happening. And also, like on a first learning play, I felt like I was just kind of like letting the kind of mechanics wash over me.
So, Brendan, you've not played this?
I have not, but the Estates is one of those games that everyone's like, Brendan, you would love this game. And I do think
Yeah,
I
it's
would
so
love this
good.
game. Yeah.
So here's why I like if you're someone who calls games mean, you would call the Estates mean, because the Estates is an auction game where the first thing that happens is there's an auction to buy a color of building, to say essentially you're like buying a company. And so that happens before the game starts, is that there's an auction for companies. And then basically people will put buildings up for auction that belong to companies, and then you auction to be the one who places the building, basically. And
Mm.
then all of the companies will score at the end of the game. And there's lots of ways for companies to end up in negative points, because if you're essentially part of a building project that is not completed, then it's negative. And one thing that you can do in the game is you can buy no companies during the opening auction, and your goal is just to put everyone else in negative, and you win with 0 points. And so it's a game where I, to win, do not just need to increase my value, I need to tank everyone else's value. And so I think that that is something that can feel mean, but to me is just a hilarious, fun thing. And maybe that's getting at this idea of Schadenfreude, which is this idea of taking pleasure in the misery of others. And of course, I don't actually feel Schadenfreude, but it's playing on this idea that if we can all laugh at something horrible that's happening, then that's a certain type of magic circle that games like the Estates are really going to hit for.
I love that example as illustrating the meanness of games also being something that depends on how the games are incentivizing the players. Because I think that's an example, Pete, where you are often incentivized to hurt other players, but likely to help yourself. But through decisions you make, you can just choose to create incentives where what becomes optimal for you is to be mean. And that's a really interesting example, because I think all of the examples that we've talked about, for the most part, players have sort of similar shared objectives, right? We're all headed in the same direction. We all have the same goals roughly. But I think when you end up with a game space where some people want to be helping themselves only, some people want to be helping themselves and hurting other people to help themselves, and other people just want to constantly be hurting other people, right, to help themselves because their goal is to have everyone else end up negative. I think that can feel even more mean when someone opts into a strategy that comes at the expense of one another.
Well, and I should say another thing that makes the Estates brilliant is that I can, let's say I buy one of your company's buildings, Brendan, and I can put it somewhere where I'm invested to force you to help me finish that development. And then we create this shared incentive. And then other people are trying to tank that. And I might be helping you in one zone and trying to mess you up in another zone. So that's just the kind of
Great.
hilarious. Yeah.
Sounds
I
awesome.
want I wanted to bring up one other kind of piece of the puzzle, which is like I'm sitting here thinking about games that really have gotten under my skin and made me
Mm.
feel just kind of like annoyed, frustrated, getting the negative emotions going, maybe from meanness, maybe from some other word. But and there's a game Pipeline I've talked about on this podcast that like I absolutely raged because there's like upgrades, um and once one there's only like one of each one, so like I was needed the level 2 or level 3 upgrade, and somebody took it away, and I felt like it was just totally pointless that they took it, and it just completely took us two out of the game, allowing the other two players to do well. um that felt bad. And then there's a game we played Arcs together, Pete, and it wasn't like that bad of a feeling because it was pretty quick game, whatever. But like I attacked somebody with all my ships, rolled all blanks, then they attacked me with all their ships, rolled all hits. I just lost. Um, and then another one was um, Beowulf the Legend, where you're like doing auctions, but you can also take risks to like get more currency to use in the auctions. And I just kept missing every risk, and my opponents kept hitting every risk, it felt like. So I would start the auction with a hand of 5 cards, and they would have 1, and just through like kind of the luck of it, I would end up losing, and that felt, I think it felt like unfair. So like two of the pipeline maybe is an outlier of like a sunk cost thing, but the other two, like there's this element of like randomness, like fate is against me. And so I don't know if that raises any thoughts for y'all, how that kind of factors in.
Well, I think hilariously, we've come full circle to where Brendan wanted to start the conversation, which in that situation, Jake, the game was being mean to you, right? Like, because that didn't feel fair.
Right.
It didn't feel like there was justice, that you and another person made the same decision, but the randomness led to a positive outcome for them and a negative outcome for you. So that's a mean game, and maybe what I would be more likely to call a harsh game or a spiky game or something like that, because it wasn't necessarily that you were upset that that player attacked you and stole from you in arcs. It was that when you tried to do it, it didn't work. And when they tried to do it, it did.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think that's exactly it. So that's a whole other spectrum that we can just layer on top of the other spectrum of meanness we kind of came up with on this podcast.
So to wrap us up, that's games themselves being mean, and we just had a conversation about players being mean within games and how games can incentivize that. And I'm going to sort of lay out where I think we ended up. You both made really great points around this, and correct me if I'm wrong anywhere. As player agency increases, the potential for players to be mean to one another also increases, but games really feel mean when they incentivize through their design players to do things that are mean to one another within the play space. That's a mean game.
I'm going to disagree, actually, and it's
Great.
a nuanced disagreement.
Awesome.
Because I think that if it is through the game's incentive that you take the action, that is not as mean as if I do something that is not incentivized by the game.
Totally agree.
But I think what we're talking about with incentives is like what level of meanness is incentivized. Punching down, we all agree, is meaner than punching up. So if the game is telling me I should be the person to eliminate them because that's going to be worth a lot of points to me or whatever, even though they're going to be knocked out of this game, they're going to have to sit there for another 3 hours. That's a lot meaner. Like the incentives there are incentivizing a meaner thing than the other game. And yes, like it would be a meaner action of the player to punch down when the game is incentivizing you to punch up.
So then here's me coming back to what I wanted, or what my prime thesis here, because we're actually talking about different things. And to use the word mean for direct interaction within the incentives of the game and the magic circle is not the same thing as someone who is acting mean within a game. And therefore, I would argue we should not call direct interaction in that way mean, but rather meanness should be used to describe players who are breaking the magic circle.
So what would you call the direct interaction games that incentivize you
I would call
doing
them highly
things?
interactive conflict games.
Okay.
But you see no distinction between like the games that like are telling players punch down and the games are saying bash the leader. Those are both high conflict, high interaction games, and neither of those is like meaner to you.
I guess for me, it kind of depends on like if everyone is in the magic circle and we talked about expectations, knows what they're getting into, then yeah, I would say that that's not mean.
I've been wanting to say this the whole time, just because it's like such a stupid thought that's going to make you guys groan. But like I hear a lot of like guns don't kill people, people kill people
Yeah.
in this conversation, which is like
That'll be our next
okay.
episode. That's our next episode.
Yeah, which is just like, two people can look at this same thing and like believe, on totally opposite ends of the spectrum, right? I think where I'm sitting here, Pete, is like to disagree with you that those two things are the same. Like, I think we can identify games that are like creating situations more often when players are doing things to another player in the game that gives them like a bad feeling. And yeah.
Yeah, no, completely. And I think, sorry, Jake, I did not mean to interrupt you, but I think, can I take
That's
the
good
ball?
because I didn't know how to land the plane.
No, I'm going to land the plane for you because I think that the point you're trying to make, Jake, is that socially, right? We're just talking about how people talk about games with the frame of this episode, mean games. It is more likely that players will walk away from a table where the disagreements in their magic circle, how they showed up, are amplified in a game that incentivizes and gives you the agency to be mean. So on average, more people will walk away calling those mean games. And Pete, I agree with you that if it's those games aren't inherently mean, intrinsically mean from the perspective of if we all come wanting to play the best version of this game, there might not be anything mean about it besides the fact that betrayal outside the game space is mean. But I also think that it's more likely that if a game incentivizes meanness, gives you the agency to be mean through direct interaction, that players are going to inevitably come with expecting different things and have bad feelings that come out of it. So then they go on the internet and talk about how this game is really mean more often. So then those games get this catch-all of, oh, Euphrates is a mean game, or oh, Game of Thrones is a mean game, because on average, more people have those experiences. So within the spectrum, you end up with these games are mean. Though, yes, players are mean, not games. Except some games
And
are
I'll just end
little
by
meaner
saying,
than others.
I'll just end by saying, I guess I like mean games.
Great. Did I land the plane? I don't.
Well, this is our expression too. This is our this is like our expression episode part 2. This is like the sequel.
It's so funny. Like the definitely Pete is right on language needs to be clear because we're all so close to people, and everybody keeps saying like, so anyway, this is what we've all come to, and I'm just like, no, that's not quite it.
I think this might be the hardest episode of Decision Space to ever end.
To listen to get all the way through. Congratulations.
We do need to have the follow-up part where we just have the mechanically dry conversation about how games can feel mean. How games can be mean to their players. That would be the capstone. Mm-hmm. Should we do that sometime?
Great. Yeah. Well, I had an awesome time debating and discussing this topic with you. It still feels not totally clear to me, but I feel
we got to finish it on the Discord.
Yeah, right.
We got to get it on.
Yeah. Well, this is a perfect opportunity for folks to jump in there and continue the discussion. And I think absolutely it is fruitful for topic for further conversations on this podcast.
If people want to have a kind conversation about meanness, they can go to the link in our Discord or to decisionspacepodcast.com, and you'll find a link to that space. It's basically a chat room in your browser. And you can also find tons of other episodes there. And also, just while I'm the one talking, say thank you to Hembry for intro and outro song We Show.
Wait, can we end it like this? On the count of 3, I'm going to ask, can games be mean? 3, 2, 1, and you say your answer one word.
Yeah.
Can games be mean? 3, 2, 1. Yes!
I love it. Bye, y'all.